What's up and welcome back. I'm John Stark from MikeTheMovieGuy.com, your favorite blind film critic. And this is Jim Henson, Idea Man. It's a movie about Jim Henson, who created the Muppets, in case you're wondering. It's currently available on Disney Plus. It has audio description by Darren Rivets and Pixelogic Studios. And yeah, this was a documentary where I was like, I wish I could see this. I hate saying that, but it's true. Mainly because it had a lot of like archival footage of old Muppets from back in the day. I didn't realize that Ralph was such like a huge part of the culture of Muppets back in the day, but he was created pretty early on and then used for like a ton of things back in the day. So I always thought of him as kind of like a top tier Muppet, but not like a central focus Muppet, if that makes any sense. Like, I feel like the focus has always been on like Kermit and Fozzie Bear, Gonzo, Miss Piggy, you know, and then like below that we've got like another tier of Muppets and these and that. Not counting the Sesame Street characters, obviously, because Big Bird I would have put above also. But but apparently he had quite a presence for a little while there. There's a little section about Ralph. It's like, wow, okay. There's also a moment that, even though it was audio described briefly, there was like some footage from a musical that didn't come to fruition that Jim Henson had wanted to put on Broadway involving Muppets, which I think is hilarious considering Avenue Q is inspired by Sesame Street, which is the thing that he created. So in a weird sort of inadvertent way, he ended up getting something on Broadway, not in the way that he had expected or planned, but he was working on a Broadway show at one point, and that was another thing I was really interested in seeing the footage from, because I feel like these are things that, you know, I'd always sort of been interested in. He has a lot of like really sort of like side projects, stuff that he's not as famous for. These little short stories. I remember seeing like The Frog Prince. There was a thing that they had mentioned before, and I'd heard that before, and I was like, I wonder if I have seen that, because it sounded really familiar to me when they said it as one of his, like, you know, like, in the little scene. And I was like, maybe I did see that. Yeah, this just explains the life of Jim Henson, complicated life from a young man, and what his thoughts were for the world and big ideas that he had with puppetry and innovations that he made, and also his family life and meeting the woman that he fell in love with, and then also sort of that complicated relationship, what his complicated home life is like. See, this is the kind of documentary that I like, where it kind of admits that not everything was perfect. And it doesn't need to necessarily show me like the darkness inside. But I hate documentaries that are like, everything was fine. This was the most amazing person ever. They were never mad. They never had a clash with anybody. They just were so great. Everybody has bad days, man. You know, we've all got our shit. Just be honest about it. So I feel like this actually is honest about it. This film does actually tackle the fact that Jim Henson's home life suffered at the you know, behest of his creative career, creating the Muppets and then later Sesame Street, and he was used so much for commercial work, but he didn't really want to be used for that. And then he started creating children's television, but he didn't want to be known as the guy who created children's television, so he wanted to be able to do other things like The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. He just wanted to be able to branch out and have other things. I think it's really funny that his son, I believe, has gone on to direct projects with puppets, like the often maligned Happy Time Murders. Melissa McCarthy starred in Happy Time Murders, I believe, was those puppets were done by Jim Henson's son, who is trying to carry on we didn't want to just do children's television. mentality of Jim Henson. Like, he had ideas. He also had grandiose ideas of theme park stuff, much like Walt Disney. So they're painting him very much as like a Walt Disney whose life tragically just got cut short at 53. After an infection, we got to be careful, man. This dude, he didn't even have, it wasn't even like he, like, surprise had cancer. He had a little bout of pneumonia and it got infected and he was gone really quickly. And he's got kids in here who are talking about, like, yeah, we couldn't even get there quick enough to say goodbye. It's just like he was, so quickly he was gone. And it's so crazy to think that Jim Henson's just out there creating, and he's at the top of his career, and he's just signed a deal with Disney, and then this happens, and he's 53. Crazy. Not from anything, not from lung cancer or anything like Walt Disney. Used to smoke a lot, and no, Jim Henson was healthy and just got an infection. So y'all keep your shit clean. Shower every day. Use soap and water. Try not to get pneumonia. If you do, seek medical attention immediately. So those are the lessons that I've learned from Jim Henson Idea Man. I actually hadn't really ever known. I know it's always been at my access, like Google, known why he died. But when I found out, I was like, wow. I always just kind of thought it was more than that, But damn, that's all of a sudden just like that. So. And then his characters went on to be used for things, and are still used for things, and Disney doesn't really know what to do with them because they're not Jim Henson, and Jim Henson had a better idea of what to do with his things. Luckily, the Sesame Workshop has been going strong with Sesame Street all these years, and they seem to have a good idea and a grounded idea of what to continue to do, because they're just continuing to do the same thing. But Disney has always had a problem since Jim Henson's death of what do we do with the Muppets? I have not been the biggest fan of the latter Muppet movies. I would say the stuff that came after Muppet Christmas Carol, like Muppet Treasure Island and Muppets in Space, Muppets from Space, are not my favorite films. So, Muppets from Space, ironically celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, guys. 25th, the big 2-5. Then there was that ABC sitcom that didn't work out. The movie revivals, I thought the first one was okay. I thought it seemed like somebody was trying to do something interesting. And then the sequel had a little bit of that vibe, the feeling of like a Muppets Take Manhattan, but also not quite. Like, somebody didn't quite get what made that movie special, so they didn't really know what to do. And Disney Plus has had a couple things with the Muppets. There was that one where they released during the pandemic that I thought was awful. It had like celebrities popping up as like viral sensations or something. It was so bad. And then the one with the band was actually decent, but they're not continuing that as a series. Anyway, all the Muppet stuff. So if you're interested to learn more about Jim Henson, this is a great documentary to do it. And I think it was pretty solid. I think the description from Darren Rivets usually does a good job, So, there are things in here that are just hard to just sort of summarize and bring into, into audio description. Like there was we were talking about like a spindly Muppet. Well, okay, well that's cool, but I want to know more. That's a quick way to describe. Like if I just said hairy Muppet, okay, it's hairy, but like how big? What does it look like? How big does it have googly eyes? I mean, like, because I've seen Muppets before, and I know that they have such a wild range in terms of what's possible for them to look like. These characters, from Fraggle Rock all the way through. It's just like everything has such a such a wide range of possibilities that it just doesn't work for me on some of these descriptions of these characters, because it just doesn't feel like it's enough. So there's that little bit of intangibility of I didn't quite get a full description of. And I think what's really interesting is that if the more well-known of a character it is, the less likely they are to describe what it looks like. So, like, later on when they're getting into the Sesame Street stuff, they don't really get into the characters. They're like, yeah, we got Big Bird, who they spend a little bit of time talking about, so you get kind of conceptually the idea, because they talk about how unique the costume was and groundbreaking at the time. But then they talk about, like, Grover and Cookie Monster and the Count and Bert and Ernie, and there really isn't like a description of them. So if you're just not familiar with them, then cool. I mean, that's fine. I mean, they're pretty famous, so I don't have that big of a problem with it. But it's interesting too, on the other end, how this man, this is all about Jim Henson, his creations. And I didn't feel like, I felt like I I walked away from this really wanting my vision back. I felt like the audio description, while it's there, and it did some interesting things, like a lot of people talk throughout this, and it was good to have a knowledge of who was talking. I felt like every time that they tried to describe a Muppet that I didn't know, I felt so much like I wanted to know. Like, I wanted to know more about this weird creation that he had that wasn't famous, that wasn't Kermit, that wasn't, Big Bird or something like that. I wanted to know more about these Muppets, and I just couldn't. It's not even like a tactile thing where somebody's gonna bring me a Muppet and I can feel it and be like, oh yeah, I can get it now. So yeah, I left oddly a little disappointed with the audio description, but I don't know what else it could have done, because it has to keep up with the pace of the movie. So the only possible way it could have described these in better terms would have been to just like stop and pause and describe the Muppet, so that we could get a really good description of the Muppet without because often they're just sort of like passing references to these things that he created, but he's famous for these things that he created. It's very weird when you think about it. It's like, one day, if they ever do like a documentary based on like the guys who created like the Precious Moments stuff that everybody's creating, or like Beanie Babies, and they're trying to bring out all the Beanie Babies, and I'm trying to think of other things that are like that. I don't know, Cabbage Patch Kids or Pound Puppies or something like that. When you're famous for the things that you've created, and they're trying to talk about things that you've created, and then you find out that there are more things that are just not quite as famous as the thing. It's like you really want to know what those things are, because you want to understand conceptually, like how broad, how artistic your reach was and your range. So I'm not gonna say, I can't like totally be like 5 stars on the audio description, but for a documentary, if this wasn't about what it was about, I think it's pretty sufficient. But it happens to be about this guy who's creating something. It would be sort of like doing a documentary on an artist and not fully being able to describe what the paintings are like, and be like, oh, well, we're talking about this artist and we just found these new works that people didn't know, and then you're trying, it's like people are familiar with, maybe it's like a Munch, and everybody knows what the Scream looks like, right? Even blind people, like, they're just conceptually, somebody has told them what the Scream looks like. But then there are like all these other paintings, and you're like, can we talk about them? Like, what else did he paint? Like, what did it look like? Like, what are these new things that you've uncovered? These lesser known works. And that's kind of what I wanted. And I just didn't get that. So, I mean, there were like some brief references, and I totally acknowledge that the only way they could have done this would have been to like pause and stop and just be like, we're going to stop now. We're going to explain this Muppet to you. In a weird way, I wanted that. And I know that that's not watching a movie. So it's an impossibility. It's not affecting my grade. It's just, I have to put that out there in the world. These are the things that I think about that are in my head with regards to audio description. I'm asking for something that cannot happen and cannot be done. So as a side project, it would be nice to know what these Muppets look like. But anyway, that's it. I'm gonna give Jim Henson Idea Man an A-. I thought it was pretty solid. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I will see you guys on the other side.